Welcome to tonight's topic, which is understanding research decisions and developing researcher competency. I've sort of thrown a couple of things into this webinar, this topic, because I think they're very important. Most applicable of this topic is for those who are just starting their PhD, but it's also a good reminder and refresher for those who are partway through the journey, just to think about some of the things, because as I go through this evening, I'm going to be touching on not only the decisions we make early on in our research, but also I'm going to talk about long-term career decisions because we're doing a PhD for a reason. So there's going to be a few different things that come into it. I consider this a very important topic because we need to know what decisions we have to make, but more importantly, we have to develop our skills and to some extent, if possible, develop our intuition to be able to make these decisions in a way that will benefit our research. But also, we have to, by the time we come to our viva, by the time we get there, we have to defend the decisions that we've made. So it's always a good thing to be constantly thinking about them and then saying to ourselves, okay, how can I defend this decision if if a panelist, an examiner, asks me during my viva? And the developing researcher competency is simply about us feeling more comfortable with the decisions that we make as a researcher. Early on, we're going to make decisions, we're going to be nervous about it. We're going to be, oh, I want to do it this way. I want to have this style of approach. I'm going to use this methodology. And as you progress through, you're going to say, oh, I really should have done it differently. And that's normal. What we've got to do is learn, okay, if I was doing it differently now, why would I do it differently? So that's the competency that comes into the equation. The objectives tonight are simple. We want to explore our own research biases and our preferences in relation to research activities. Now, this is the first decision because who we are as people, not necessarily the training we get at undergraduate and maybe master's level, but who we are as people, what guides our life, actually infiltrates the decisions that we make as researchers. So it's good for us to know what our own biases are and how that shapes discussions. A good example, I had a consult a couple of weeks ago with a researcher who wrote a publication or wrote for publication, still underway, about a Marxist perspective on something. And I thought that was really interesting because I've studied that before and I understand it. I have friends who fit into that paradigm or that school of thought. And it was really important that that person knew where that came from in their background as to why they wanted to adopt that particular perspective. And that also means for people out there who don't subscribe to the same perspective, they're going to see things differently. So it creates a bias for us as a researcher. The second objective, explore tools for planning research topics and research trajectories. Now, this is where I'm going to talk about your career. Not only what are you doing for your PhD, because, you know, that's today, that's tomorrow, but your career is everything past that. And what you do today, the decisions we make today, whether it be related to publishing, whether it be related to the simple qualitative, quantitative paradigm, it's still going to have an impact. I'm going to explore tools for identifying research impact. There is no point in being a researcher if you're not going to create an impact on community or society? So we're going to have a look at how do I identify the research impact. And the big question from that is, and I'm going to ask you the question now and let you think about it. What impact do you hope to make? Because knowing the impact you want, how you want to influence community and society, that's going to influence the decisions we make to make sure we and our research get there. I want to focus on understanding what makes us good, or actually a better word, effective researchers. Effective is way better than good. I want to appreciate decisions we make as researchers before and during the process. That's kind of, obvious stuff. And the final one, to be aware of the role of ethics in our journey. Now, again, I'm just, a gentle reminder, this is aimed at those who are starting their journey, but it is very good refresher for those who are partway through their journey and closer to the end than they are to the beginning. So I wanted to start off with what I consider to be the attributes of a good researcher. Probably not the person in that photo, because I know Farrell's going to say something about that at some stage. But there are 4 attributes that I feel are essential for a good researcher to have. And it's quite easy. Ethical, inquisitive, open-minded, and methodical. Not methodological, but methodical. The ethical one equates to being honest. You do the research in a right way. Now, here's a question. Here's a decision. When we're looking at how to do our research, our job is to be transparent, but sometimes it's attractive or easy for a new researcher to want to cut corners. For example, I want to survey 1,000 people, and I'm going to use a particular sampling method. Let's just say stratified. It doesn't really matter. But at the end of the day, I'm not getting my 1,000 people, so I've got to cut a few corners to get it. Now, the first decision is this ethical? The answer is actually it can be. The second decision is, am I transparent about it in my dissertation? And there, the ethical answer is yes. And the wise decision, the wise answer to that one will be yes as well. Sometimes we have to cut corners, but we have to be honest about it. So when I refer to ethical as honest, I'm looking at transparent. I'm looking at not taking advantage of anybody. And more importantly, I'm looking at not falsifying the data. So years ago, when I started my career, I had a colleague in the economics department who falsified the data of his PhD. 30 years later, he retired. He did not get his PhD. The university wouldn't let him. They kept him teaching, but that guy never did any research ever again. And that was because people questioned his ethics. The second attribute that's the most important is the inquisitive, or the common English word for this is being nosy. And being nosy is about, you see something and you want to find out more. You want to ask those questions. You need an answer, or you need to at least attempt to get an answer. Now, why this is an attribute for a good researcher is our job as a researcher is to find something new. Now, some people might argue our job is to confirm something old, not at PhD level. At PhD level, we want to progress. We want to see something different. We want to see something new. If we are nosy, i.e. we sort of poke our nose into places where it might not be appropriate, or we ask difficult questions, that actually makes us a good researcher, because we're trying to overturn, I think, old stones and find what's underneath them. We need to be open-minded. Now, that's translates in my world to willing to try. And what I mean by this is, look, research fits into a very simple qualitative or quantitative paradigm. Now, I know it, if we read, yes, it's way more complicated than that. But at surface level, we're either going to say I'm a qualitative person like me, or I'm a quantitative person. And either is fine. What I mean by the willingness to try is we need to be able to step outside of our comfort zone. So as a qualitative person, maybe I need to do more quantitative based analyses. Um, and one of my New Year's resolutions this year was to actually relearn basics of quantitative analysis so that I can actually start engaging with that with some of the research that I do on behalf of the third degree and on behalf of universities and clients. But open-mindedness is a little bit more than that. As a qualitative researcher, most people are going to say, oh, are you doing interviews, focus groups, or observational research? Actually, I want to do journaling. And that's, one of the creative research methods, or maybe I want to do something a little bit more detailed than that. The willingness to try is our ability as a researcher to say, you know what? The standard boring paradigms aren't enough. I need to go further. And that to me is actually a massive decision because it's easy for me to say, oh, let's do focus groups and I'll analyze that and that will be enough. But to be able to take that step and say, actually, I want to start with some focus groups. And after that focus group, I'm then going to select some participants and I'm going to do some journaling with them. And then while they're going through the journaling process, I'm going to find a way to work with observational techniques. Now, all of that is that willingness to step beyond and create more work for myself, create more work for us as researchers, but actually going that extra mile. Now, this is a decision showcases that you care about the research. You care about the data that you're going to get, but you also care about how you're going to be able to use that data in drawing conclusions and drawing inferences when you do your write-up for your dissertation. And the final one is methodical, i.e. no shortcuts, kind of relates to the ethics thing. But it's also about, look, I'm on a journey, I do things a certain way, I build them up. I don't try to rush something. And a good example would be the literature review, for example. An easy way to rush a literature review is to use an AI tool and to throw something together. The problem with using an AI tool is, one, it's not always accurate, so it might give you some fake references. Two, because although it helps, don't get me wrong, and it's not a bad tool, but the process of reading articles yourself, rather than something summarizing it and saying you should read this article, means you learn from the crap articles as much as you learn from the good ones that you're going to cite. And that's why I'm kind of old-fashioned and don't enjoy or don't advocate strongly for AI to help us with, say, a literature review, because I think the process of reading and learning that this article is terrible helps our critical thinking, but it helps our immersion in the broader discipline that we have as well. So as a researcher, when I make a decision to make a shortcut, I'm actually taking away an opportunity for me to better understand my discipline or the approaches to my discipline as well. So by doing it the old-fashioned way, I'm actually going through step by step. I'm reading stuff I wish I had never read and maybe didn't need to. but that's also giving me that bigger picture context to what I'm doing. It also comes into the process of writing, for example. It comes into the process when we're doing our data collection. So we want to be as ethical as possible, but we also want to make sure that we're being efficient. So there is a trade-off for us. So to me, those are the attributes of what a good researcher is. But it also leads us to the types of decisions that we as researchers have to make. Now, I'm going to argue well, other people argue there are 5 essential skills to become a researcher. I argue that there are 6, but let's go with the first 5. And my point here is, look, we develop these through our own research. We also develop these through doing projects with others, whether it be an internship, volunteer, a collaborator on a research project with somebody else. But we need to have these skills. And I'm going to say, if today you do not have any of these 6 skills, your first decision is going to be, how and where can I upskill myself to do this? So we need project management skills. Now, next week, I'm actually doing a webinar, I think it's next week, called Project Managing Your PhD or Project Managing Your Doctorate. And the idea of project management is being able to take an entire task, breaking it down into logical steps, scheduling those steps so that we can complete the process. And I want to highlight there's a thing called graduate on time, GOT. Different countries call it different things. And for some, it's a big deal. For others, it's not that important. But I think if you're receiving a research grant or research funding or scholarship, the concept of graduate on time is super important for you. And the project management skill means not only do we map out how I'm going to finish my doctorate within 3 years or whatever time frame you have, it also allows for buffers so that if something goes wrong, maybe the data collection is slow, maybe the write-up is taking a lot longer than you thought. All of these things happen, right? No issue. But they provide buffers in there. So if things go wrong or things go a little bit different to what was expected, you still have that opportunity to graduate on time. So project management's very important. It's also important from the financial side, not if somebody's funding you, if you're funding yourself. Because if you go over time, of course, you have to pay more fees to the university. And honestly, universities are rich enough in many ways. So giving them more money is not always a good thing for us as candidates. You need to learn how to handle budgets. You're going to be spending money. You might be receiving money, but you're certainly going to be spending it. How much is it going to cost you to conduct 12 focus groups with 6 people in each one? What travel expenses, all sorts of things like that. But nobody does a PhD without spending something. You need to know about team leading and managing. Although the PhD is often considered a lonely experience, chances are you will be getting someone to help you. Someone might help you conduct your focus groups, for example. So you might have a research assistant. Somebody might help you to run the data that you get. So you might be doing quantitative, but you need someone to do the data entry and to help you run the statistical tests. So you might be hiring, another grad student, for example, to do that. You've got to lead that person, whether it's a team of, one person or you've got a bigger team because your project is large. You still have that. And more importantly, I want to get you thinking about a new idea. Often when we think about leading a team, we think about somebody who's more experienced, leading somebody who's less experienced, right? That's the common way. But you're also leading your supervisor. You are the one in the driving seat. And what I mean by number 3 out of the 6 here is, how do you handle and manage the relationship with your supervisor? And how do you mitigate the challenges that you face with them? Because at the end of the day, even though we expect that they're leading us, they are not going to be spoon feeding us. And it's our job actually to manage them and say, this is what I need from you now. I've done this work. I need your advice here. I need your thoughts here. I need you to introduce me to somebody, whatever that is. But that's actually a skill you have to have. Number 4 is handling data. Whether you're qualitative or quantitative, you're going to get a large amount of data. And how do you deal with that? If I give you 500 pages of interview transcripts that have been beautifully typed out, because what I did is I used AI and I got voice to text, and I give you 500 pages of interview transcripts. How are you going to work with that? And for many of us, I remember the first time I got data like that, I'm like, oh, I was absolutely overwhelmed. And I had to think through, how do I work with this? And what steps do I take? How do I teach myself this? And that to me is an essential decision, because that will determine the quality of the research output that you have. And it will certainly determine the quality of your analysis, which ultimately determines the insights you bring to it. The 5th one being IT skills. We need to use simple things like Microsoft Word, like Excel. As we get into publishing, we need to develop skills in other software, some that's very specific to publishing itself, like LaTeX, some that's very specific to data presentation. So advanced ways to create graphics, whether that be a GIS software, whether it be software like SPSS or R, or whether it be some of the new AI-based software or platforms that we get out there. So we need to have that. Now, I've added a 6th one because although number 1 to 5 is very important, number 6 is the most important. There's no point in having great research if you are unable to communicate that research to someone else. Very simple. So communication and stakeholder outreach probably should be 6 and 7, but let's lump it together. Communication is about, how do you share your research? How do you disseminate your research? And I kind of want to emphasize that this is a decision you get to make quite early on. When you're starting your PhD and when you're looking to how it's going to progress, you should have an idea of, who is this research for? We know it's for you, we get that. But who in the community needs to receive or be informed or be engaged with the particular research? How are you going to communicate it with them? A lot of people, excuse me, a lot of people say to me, I only need to write my dissertation and then it's done. Well, that's actually really wrong. You need to write a dissertation. Now, if English, for example, is not my first language, or the language that you are publishing in is not your first language, we have AI that does help us. We have proofreaders and editors that help us. You know, we offer those services. We have all of that. But the Viva, or the Viva, whatever you want to call it, when we come to do that, it's still us. We have to know our research 100%. And we've got to be able to tell it as a story. We can't just stand up there and defend some slides, because you're going to get an examiner like me who sort of goes in and it's like, so why are you a quantitative researcher? Why did you make that decision? Or I'm going to ask a question like, what happened in your childhood that led you to have an interest in this topic? I want to find out more than just what's on the written paper. And then you're going to have made a couple of decisions, and I'm going to be like, so why did you use this software instead of a different piece of software to do your data analysis? Or you drew a conclusion here. What was the thinking process for you behind that conclusion? And you might think they seem weird questions, but what they do is they show to me that you have well understood the research that you've done and the processes, because I want to test your decisions. The research I can read, I can say, oh yeah, correct, 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 correct. I want to test your decisions, and I want to test your belief in those decisions, your own, I've forgotten the word, your own true understanding that the decision you made was the right decision. And you might say, well, I don't write decisions for my dissertation. That's true. But everything you write in your dissertation was a decision. Why did you choose this particular theorist to cite over somebody else? Or why did you think this contribution was relevant? All sorts of things that are going to be in there. So the communication is not just the written. It is your ability to defend yourself. And you get three distinct chances during your doctorate journey to defend yourself. First, you have to defend your proposal. Secondly, some of us, not everybody, because it differs across the world, but some of us will have an annual review. You have to defend your progress. And you have to be able to communicate the progress that you've made and either the reasons for it or the reasons why it didn't really happen. Thirdly, you have to defend your thesis, and that's your viva. But beyond that, how are you going to communicate that research to the stakeholders beyond just going in and sitting in and, defending through your viva? How are you going to share that with other people, the communities of interest that you have? How are you going to share that with them? Now, if you say to me today, and a lot of people can, right? I can write, I can't speak. Well, I'm actually the opposite. I can speak really well, and it's from then I start my writing. My speaking skills are way better than my writing skills on a first draft. But you might say to me, look, I can write this, I can get through that. I don't know how to tell it as a story. I don't know how to shift from academic language, i.e. what you're writing your dissertation into, to community language. Maybe you have to do town hall. Maybe you have to do some lobbying at policy level. And of course, going to governmental organizations is a different language, a different tonality of language from what we do. So our key decision here is, how do I build the experience? How do I get the training or guidance or mentorship that I need to go into that scenario? So give a great example. When you present to other academics, it's kind of structured. When you go in to meet a member of parliament or a minister, a government minister, of course, the whole approach is very different and it can be very daunting. So how do I develop those skills? And the moreover question is, do I need to develop them? Chances are yes. And when do I need to develop them by? So how do I develop them? So all of these whole 6 things to become a researcher. All of these have decisions about what do you have to do, personal and professional development. What do you have to do to make sure that you can handle those tasks, or preferably so that you can excel in those particular tasks? It also gives us another problem, and this is something that I struggled with massively. Even until a couple of years ago, I still struggled with that because I have many interests and they're all great. My early interests when I started my master's degree, just to give a context, I have a master's degree in economic development. I looked at Southeast Asian and East Asian business history. Um, it's technically an economics degree, which kind of led into a PhD in economics on a related topic. But I had a couple of other interests as well. I was interested in cemetery landscapes. How do different cultures shape the design of cemeteries, of tombstones, of post-life experiences? And I was actually told by a professor who had an interest in this, who I wanted as my supervisor. He's like, Craig, you won't get a job. You'll be teaching high school geography. Don't do this. Choose another topic, which I did. But that was one of my topic interests. I was interested in cultural relationships. I was interested in housing policy. So I moved into governmental stuff. Um, I did a project on globalization of the movie industry, the cinema industry. The problem was these were all out. There was even once I tried to write a paper on garden design and how that relates to our cultural understanding of the world. All fascinating stuff, but it's too many interests to have as one person at a stage where you're a research candidate. So today, if I look at it, I have three interests. I have higher education research policy. I have teacher training. Actually, I have four interests, sorry. That's bad. I have teacher training. I have, of course, qualitative research methods. But I also have crisis communication. And the first three are related in many ways. I mean, they're all within the higher education industry. The fourth one, which I'm sort of active on, is almost unrelated in so many ways. So having multiple interests means, what do we focus on? And I'm just going to make it as blatant as possible. As a PhD candidate, focus on getting your dissertation done before you look at other things that may fit into your long-term trajectory. Okay, so focus on that. If you're like me and you're an entrepreneur as well as an academic, focus on where the money comes from. But that changes the long-term career as well. So if you have too many interests as a PhD candidate, my advice is think very hard. What is going to contribute to your PhD? What can be left on the back burner and taken up as a project after you have graduated? What can you suggest to somebody else and let them handle it so you don't have to? You know, maybe you've got a great topic, but it's out of where you really see yourself being. You can certainly hand those topics to other people that you know might be interested. Hey, this is something I identified. I look forward to reading what you have done on it into the future. So early on, it's not only a decision about what your interests are, but the real decision here is focus. You have to decide to be as focused as you possibly can so that you can complete, or if we want to use the term I used in the previous slide, graduate on time, but you need to be as focused as you can. Now, in terms of this one, it's I want to talk about us, and I want to talk about our biases. I want to talk about our positionality. Now, positionality is a big concept, and I'm not going to talk about it much here. If you go onto our website, www.ttd.education/resources, I did a video a couple of years ago about positionality. I'm going to be doing another webinar on this. But take a look at that. It's basically, who am I as a researcher? We need to understand ourselves in order to see how we influence the research that we do. Most of us have a personal reason for our research. Some maybe not. It might be quite distant or maybe non-existent. You know, we might just have found it interesting and there was an opportunity at that. But many of us who are in social sciences in particular, or who are in business-based research, actually have a more personal reason. And our most valuable skill, our most valuable asset out of this is understanding who I am, what has influenced me. And this comes down to bias. What did we experience growing up? What community experiences have we had? Are we shaped by religion? Are we shaped by social constructs? You know, the different cultures that we come from, the different countries that we come from, and what we see as the norm versus what we see as something different. A great example, you know, I live in Malaysia. Um, there's always the argument about Malaysian values versus Western values. Well, I'm a Westerner. I see Western values first. I understand Asian values, and I kind of can bridge the chasm between the two. But I now have to understand, how have I changed? Because that now influences the way I think about approaching other people. So if I'm going to do interviews, for example, my approaches to interviews have changed, but I've been influenced by my cultural norms as to how you would go about doing it. We need to know those biases. We need to know what shapes the way we think and what we believe in, because that's going to shape our writing. Now, I know in a way this is a very complicated thing, because as researchers, we are meant to be objective, but as people, we are far from objective. We're very subjective, and that will translate across. So that gives us our positionality. Reflexivity is thinking back, and the thinking back about how we did something, how we chose the way we want to frame something. So maybe we want to think about, why did we choose the theoretical framework or the theoretical model that we're using? Because there are more than one in most cases. How did I choose that? Why did I choose that? Did I choose it because it made the most sense? Did I choose it because in my upbringing, it actually seems to be most logical? So that's the reflexivity, thinking back, but also thinking back on the methodologies. Yes, I chose to do interviews because I'm comfortable in that setting. I wasn't comfortable with embracing a more chaotic approach through, say, a mixed method. So not to say it's chaotic, it's just more complicated. So more complicated approach. Or choosing to use creative research methods, because that required me to go outside of my own comfort zone and really think about how I can get data. So I chose easy over hard, for example. Can I undo that decision? So all of that becomes part of our decision making during the process, but all of this also becomes part of our competence. As a researcher, we grow through understanding the mistakes of the past as well. So even though I can't change the fact that I did interviews with, 100 people and I got all my data and I should have done something different, my way of growing as a researcher saying, now I know I only needed 20 interviews. And what I should have done is some observational work on top of that. Now that's competency. It's recognizing that the next time around, I can do this differently. We also have to ask about the purpose of our research. And this applies at every single stage of your research up until the time you are granted the doctor title. I want you to think very hard, no matter what stage of your research experience you are at now, okay? But I want you to think very hard about what your true purpose of your research is. And I don't need you to sort of, spit it out or to put it in the chat box, but if you want to, I'm more than happy for you guys to put your thoughts into the chat box and share. But I want to look at the three basic purposes of research. One is academic or knowledge production. This is about new knowledge to be able to share with other people. Now, this kind of is a bit, to me, I hate the idea of purely academic knowledge production as a purpose only. I just want to confirm that something happens. You're not helping the world by telling me something you already know. You're just applying it to something else. That's not enough of an impact. And I guess I want to change the word purpose, or I want to subtext it with the word impact, because that's the important one. Social introduces us to impact for community. Our research is going to make a difference for a community of interest. I'm doing cancer research, for example. That's going to help cancer patients. It's going to help families of cancer patients. It's going to help medical professionals maybe diagnose cancers within patients faster. All realm of things, but that has an impact for society, an impact for community. Now, why do I talk about this? Because we have to know what the impact of our research will be. And we have to make a very strong decision to make sure that we are true to that impact. Okay, that's the important part. We have to be true to our impact. The third one is commercial, financial. I can make money from this. I'm developing a prototype. That prototype will give me a revenue stream or a whole business into the future. Now, these are not independent of each other. Every single piece of research we do fulfills academic or knowledge production. That's a given, okay? But the question you have to ask yourself is that enough? Is that, if you die today, is that what you want to be known for? I created a theory that nobody used. The social, i.e. the community, or the commercial and the financial, can happen together on top of that. And if I can make an impact for society, kind of like the webinars we give for free and the help that we make available for students, right? That's a good thing. If I can make money from it, even better. So we might get 1, 2, or 3 of these things. We're always going to have that academic knowledge production. But again, the question is that enough of an impact for you? So I want you to think about in your own minds, and I'm always open for a conversation about it, but what is your actual purpose of your research? And I want to get you, for those of you who have been doing your PhD journey maybe a year or more, okay? How has that purpose changed? Because purpose does change and potential impact also changes from that. We make choices every day as a researcher, and these are determined by a number of different things. Now, again, I want to put this here because these are questions I would ask you in a Viva. These are questions that I would want you to defend. Now, the choices we make are determined by a lot of things. They're determined by the literature. And as I talk to different people, globally, we are all in a different position. Some of us are at universities that have fantastic access to publishing. Some of us are at universities where the access is not as good. So if you're part of our WhatsApp group chat, you'll see people asking, hey, can anyone help me find this article? It's because the university doesn't have access to it. I might go on to my university website, which I do every time somebody asks, actually, and I try to find. Even my university, which is a British university, doesn't have access to everything, but it has more access than some other people, so it might be there. So we're determined by the literature. We make our literature review, which is based on the fact that we only have access to certain things. We make that literature review and we choose what goes into it, what is important. Again, when we choose what goes into a literature review, you're shaping how you're going to frame your research. So it's a very important decision. We don't throw everything into a literature review because it's there, but we should do a literature mapping exercise which shows the relationship of everything so that our choice becomes actually what made the real contribution, what's the most important. Our choices are determined by new developments, what's happening at the very time we are trying to do research. This is a challenge. We've got what we think is a unique topic. I promise you, your topic is not unique. It's just not popular yet. There is a theory of knowledge that suggests any one idea related to knowledge production, knowledge acquisition, research is actually happening at the same time in multiple geographies around the world, but they're unrelated to each other. They have no idea that there's somebody else doing the same thing. And this is actually a theory of knowledge that came out in, I think, the 1980s, or late 1980s, if I'm not mistaken. But the idea is somebody else is doing the same research you're doing, maybe even the same way, but they've never heard of you, and you've never heard of them. But we make choices that are determined by that. We see something new, we're like, oh, somebody else is doing this. That's the worst feeling. You think you're doing something unique, and you discover another PhD student somewhere else in the world is doing it. That's fine. Continue. Because all you have to do is show that you understand that somebody else is working on it. You still go ahead with the research that you're doing. Now, here's where bad choices are made. We see someone else doing similar research and we say, well, they're a year ahead of us. Therefore, I need to change my topic. That's a bad choice because, again, different data sets, different populations, perhaps. They're a year ahead of you. Fantastic. Cite them and do better. There's so many things you can do as a result, but we can also make very bad choices because of fear and because of concern that we won't be seen as cutting edge. I'll give a great example of where this is a real problem. Those of us who are doing any research on artificial intelligence, any work related to artificial intelligence, the new developments are happening every day. I give some presentations on AI to different universities because I'm interested in the ethics And how do we embrace AI as a researcher? But AI changes every day. Just when you think you've come to grips with the bulk of what it should be, it's in a whole different direction. There's new terminology, there's new possibilities. And sometimes you can't even think, how can you reach that possibility? But that's because somebody else has been working on it as long as you have. New developments happen all the time. Focus on your work. Don't make choices based on other people's new developments. Make your choices based on historical developments so that you can do your research better. Choices are made based on our positionality, our worldview, previous slide. They're based on our supervisors, our departments, our universities. And we've got to decide very early on. You know your university, you know what it's known for, especially your department. Look at your supervisor. Is your supervisor's career path what you want? Is your supervisor somebody who's going to give you flexibility? Is your supervisor going to support you the way that you need? Not what somebody else says, they're a good supervisor, they're really friendly, blah, blah, blah. I need weekly emails, or I need fast turnaround, or I need somebody who'll listen and throw questions at me rather than give me answers. So you've got to look at that, but this is also a choice for you. Is your supervisor the best person that you have access to guide your project? Job prospects is one, and I'm going to talk about how do we go from planning a PhD to planning a career in that same instance, because it's very important. Our choices are made by time. Now, this is method, this is data collection mostly. If our time is short, maybe this is where we have to think about what corners do I cut in an ethical way to make sure I get my data. Do I reduce my sample size? Do I go from, say, a qualitative to a quantitative? So I might go from focus groups to doing a survey because it's easier to administer. Do I remove a pilot study? Because a pilot study is going to take me 6 months. And in that 6 months, I can't go ahead with my other data collection. So maybe I have to take that out. These are all choices we have to make. I want to emphasize, maybe we've got, as an example, maybe we have a mixed method study. It is okay to reduce the scope, to scale down, to make smaller. Excuse me. It is okay to reduce the scope of your research to fit into available time. If you can't get all the data that you needed, you have to decide, what is my cutoff point when I say, look, I'm going ahead with my data analysis based on what I've got. One of the reflections we get to make, and this will be something you would then defend in your viva, is why did you make that decision? And if you say to me, you know, I tried A, I tried B, I tried C, I tried D, and I'm struggling to get the responses, but I got 45 responses and that was sufficient for me to proceed, I'm going to be able to say, okay, that's a fair defense. That's acceptable. So we have to make choices related to all of this because we have to defend them. And it also comes down to the last one. Availability of resources, of data, respondents, facilities, all sorts of things influence us. I was having a consult with a student, PhD candidate, sorry, a few weeks ago, and she was doing everything via survey, which was great. Survey was fantastic. She had got some good data. And then she said, I'm doing a site visit. So she was traveling to a different country. And my first question to her was, what are you going to do there? And she said, I'm going to interview the people that I surveyed. I'm like, why? What's the point? You're spending money, you're wasting time, you're going to get nothing different. If you did a Zoom call, you'll get exactly the same results. If you changed a couple of your questions in your survey, you're going to get pretty much the same results. In the end, she realized that she was spending money and time to do something because she wanted a mixed method study. But the mixed methods didn't actually add any tremendous value to her research. There were other ways to do it. So we have to make these decisions. And sometimes we're so tied up in our own decisions that we don't recognize we can do it differently. We can be more efficient with this. Now, fundamentally, and I'm going to rush through the next couple of slides because I think most of us here kind of have this grasp, but I just sort of want to touch upon it. Fundamentally, the first decision we make is qualitative versus quantitative, or qualitative and quantitative. But there's actually a lot more. So, we've got different types of research. Are we going to be experimental? Are we looking at realism? Are we looking at observational, historical? Are we looking at mixed methods? Are we looking at case studies? Are we looking at action research? All of these are very early. But we might do our literature review in order to frame some research questions. And then we might suddenly realize that actually my approach has to be different. Changing is not a problem. Defending that change again. So don't feel bad if you're partway through, say, almost a year in even. You're a year into your research and suddenly you think, I really need to do this differently. That's fine, but don't throw everything away and start again. Look at what can I adjust? What can I change? How do I temper this? How do I bridge a change in decision into where I'm heading? And it comes down, interestingly, to a type of thesis that you want. And this is also a decision that you have to make, especially if it's a topic that has come from yourself, rather than the university said, here's a topic, go research it, here's some money. Do you want a theoretical or a practical dissertation? What type of research do you want? Do you want theoretical where you're adding that knowledge and you're providing a framework? Or do you want something that is more likely to be used and embraced and benefited from by the community, a community of interest to you? So this is something early, and I'm going to ask you, take a moment to think for yourself. Is my research theoretical or is it practical? And is this the impact that I wanted and why? And it's perfectly fine to be theoretical as it is to be practical. Some people will argue a PhD is more theoretical and a DBA, for example, or a professional doctorate is more practical. But I don't see it that way. Both are very relevant in all types of doctorates. What comes down to is, what did you want as a researcher? What's important to you as a researcher? At the heart of all good research is two things: people, i.e. us, the researcher, but also the depth of understanding that we want. And we have to know, are we going, or have we gone deep enough with what we want to be able to achieve? It comes back to the qualitative or quantitative argument again, but let's sort of move on from that. I think most of us are familiar with the fact that both qualitative and quantitative give us very different types of knowledge. A quantitative looks at numbers, a qualitative looks at stories. And under qualitative research, we might do a case study. And I do a session on case studies. And one of the questions I ask is, can you have a case study of one? And the answer is yes. It's a very unique qualitative approach, but it enables us to share a voice. And that sharing of the voice may help us to amplify issues that are out there, or to be able to share issues so that others will think about it in either a qualitative or quantitative way subsequently. But we know that there's going to be differences. We have to make a decision. I will argue that this comes down to the way we think. I like talking. I like learning from people. I like hearing narratives. I like hearing stories. To me, that's the way I think. So therefore, qualitative is my first approach. Quantitative is a no-go because I'm scared of numbers. The truth is, I'm just lazy. I can do it. Now as I reflect on myself and how I've changed, especially the last couple of years, actually, I'm doing more quantitative stuff, but I've got help to do that quantitative stuff. So how does this translate into what's most important? Excuse me, the skills of the researcher, because this is what we're here for. Qualitative researchers need the following skills. Interpersonal skills. Don't be a qualitative researcher if you don't like dealing with people, okay? It just makes it really, really tough. So the ability to build trust, the ability to communicate with others from different backgrounds, be it socioeconomic, cultural, religious, cultural, all range of backgrounds, right? Being able to get in and talk to people is a huge skill. If you don't have that skill, you have two choices: develop it or go for quantitative. Actually, there's a third choice. How can I bring in a research assistant who is better at conducting a focus group or an interview, for example, to help me? So a project that I'm working on at the moment, it's got three of us professors and she just graduated her PhD. She just passed her Viva a few months ago. She's doing all the interviews, and the three of us are just looking at the other aspects of it, and it works out fine. So maybe that's a consideration. You need to have observational skills. Now, this is not about you sitting on a park bench and watching kids play and making notes about it. Observational skills kind of links down to the body language. When you're interviewing somebody, you're listening to what they say and you're watching what they're doing at the same time. And sometimes those things do not match. The observational skills is about understanding body language. It's about observing the environment in which something is happening. Give an example. For example, one of the examples I often use is research related to domestic violence, especially research on domestic violence that was happening during COVID lockdown periods. So one of the challenges in doing online interviews or focus groups is about the ethics of the environment that your respondent is in. And if I'm talking to somebody and I'm asking questions about domestic violence, of course, the setting that they're in is going to tell me something. If they're in their living room and they're answering questions and things are happening, the kids are walking through, or the husband or the wife is close by, I'm going to pay more attention to the tone of voice, because when other people can influence an answer or have a vested interest in the answers may change. So observationally, I've got to look and I've got to say, I don't think this person is telling me everything, because this person is forced perhaps to do this interview with the people who are being violent towards them. So it's not just the body language, it's the whole setting that you get. It's everything that comes into context. Now, this is a skill, because we're not only working on the narrative they tell us, we're working on everything that feeds that narrative. So we've got to be able to understand it. We need negotiation skills. You know what? Gatekeepers are horrible. You want to get in to talk to somebody, but their PA or their receptionist or whatever always says no. How do you negotiate to get something that you want? Maybe I really want you as a respondent, and I've got lots of reasons, but you're adamant or you're maybe, excuse me, concerned about it. I've got to be able to find ways to make sure you are fully informed to make that decision. It's not about being coercive and forcing you to do it. It's about finding a win-win, and it's about doing that ethically. We have to deal with troubleshooting. Things change, things happen. Interviews get rescheduled. Somebody goes halfway through an interview and then they don't want to continue. So we lose our data. This is troubleshooting. All of this happens. A great type of troubleshooting is when we get a whole lot of data, be it qualitative or quantitative, doesn't matter. But we're trying to visualize that. Most troubleshooting would say, well, we can do a pie chart, or we can do a bar chart. Troubleshooting is also saying what's new ways that we can use to represent the data so that we can tell a visual story about it. And that comes down to how do I find out about new software, new data analytics platforms, new visual techniques, all of that. And more so, how do I learn those? So one of, number 5 of those 6 skills we needed was technology IT. That comes into here. Quick response. We've got to be able to engage. If somebody tells us something, we've got to be able to work with it and work with it in a professional way. We need to train. Maybe we have a research assistant. Fantastic. But I've got to train my research assistant so that when they go out and represent our research, they're doing it the same way that I would do it, i.e. there's not a difference. Or maybe they need to develop some of these skills. So it's my responsibility to make sure they have it. We look at body language, talked about. But it's not only the observational of their body language, it's also your body language. So I'm doing an interview with you and I've asked you a sensitive question and you've told me quite a shocking answer. And I have a reaction like that. That's not good body language. I've already shown a bias. I've already shaped what might come next. But if I just sit there and you're telling me about how your former partner stabbed you and cut you open and did all that, and I'm sitting there, that's also showing a bias. It's showing a disinterest. So I've got to make sure that my body language matches the professional expectations of the setting in which I'm conducting the research. That can be hard because when we're surprised with something, quite often our face will show it before our words will. We have to think about ethics and compromise. So ethics, I always argue ethics is a continuum. And it's also a negotiation. Sometimes we have to challenge the status quo in order to get the research data. And that's the compromise about it. But we as researchers have to have that skill. That skill applies a lot less not a lot less, it applies differently in a quantitative approach. And finally, triangulation. How do we overlay different sets of data to actually come to the truth, especially if different data tells us different things? That triangulation also involves quantitative data, but it's the skill that we have to work out what the perspective is, what the truth is, and to be able to then say, you know what, out of these different data sets, this is the commonalities, this is what I can confidently talk about. Now, you'll notice I didn't have a quantitative section to this because I don't know if I'm the world's most appropriate person to actually talk about quantitative. but there are different skill sets that are applied and that are, of course, going to be needed. Now, I kind of want to bring this into career planning, and I have a purpose with this because if we've come to the stage that we're doing a doctorate, PhD or professional doctorate, doesn't matter, but if we've come to a stage that we're doing a doctorate, we should already have an idea of what our career is. That doesn't mean you have to be an academic, by the way. There's so many other uh, career opportunities out there, and I encourage this. Explore all career opportunities. Most supervisors want a PhD candidate that will become an academic. And most supervisors, when their PhD candidate says, well, I want to go and work in government or I want to go and help the community, they're going to look at, I'm wasting my time. I'm going to find another candidate. So there's always that barrier up there. But I want, encourage you to think about the what they call alt-ac, alternative to academic employment and career paths, because there's so many out there. Myself, I've had that. I've worked for companies, I've had my own business outside of education and have done very comfortably with that. And I've had a fantastic career. I've also had a fantastic career inside the higher education realm. So think about that. But I just want to touch on this because there's a few things that I feel are important. And these are decisions that we have to not only make early on in the process, these are decisions that are going to shape the way in which we develop our research. And of course, the way in which we have output of our research. How do we communicate it to other people? So you need to have a plan, but you need to have it flexible. That's kind of sensible, but have an idea of what you want to get. It's no longer competitive to have a PhD and to let the career just happen. When I started in academia as an academic, I started at the lowest possible rank of tutor, but we did research. When I started there, the PhD guaranteed you had a permanent job for life. And many of the people that I know that either preceded me or that came from my generation have been career academics for life, still to today, 30 years later. The PhD is a nice to have, but it's never going to be a guarantee. So you have to be proactive. You have to think about what your research is going to be, what your teaching might be if you go the academic track, what the commercial side of things are, how, whether that's going into industry or whether that's taking the research you do and selling that. I may be selling the rights to the research, maybe being a consultant for a number of organizations to help them develop and to help them grow. Or are you offering service? How do you give back to the community and what you want to do? This is a really important thing to think about because this is not, oh, what's my research topic and what is going to be my publication plan for the coming years. But this is actually thinking about what am I going to do with the skills that I develop through the PhD process. Then I can ask you, where do you want to be in say 5, 10, or 15 years' time? And I'm going to assume, do you want to be at the same university? Now, let's assume where do you want to be in 15 years' time? And I say, do you want to be at the same university? And you say, yes. I'm going to say, please rethink that. So there's some research on academic dinosaurs being less productive. Those who stay at the same university and just slowly climb the ladder but don't really make a huge impact, not really well seen, not a good career move. But there may be reasons why. Family connections, other reasons why they may want to stay. I have several good friends who have stayed at the same university for a very long time. One of them, who was my mentor from when I started, stayed at the same university for over 35 years. She finally moved to a different university about 4 years ago as a retirement plan. But 35 years in the same university, she saw a lot happening, but that also shaped her. So important to think about that. Important to think, do you want to be in higher education or the academy in general? Do you want to be commercial, government? Do you even want to be in the same research field? So that's an important one. And that links to, do you want to be interdisciplinary? So my undergraduate's geography, kind of fun. That shaped a lot of the postgrad research I did in economics. I teach for an applied psychology department. I do research on crisis communication. My trajectory has been very weird, but that's because I am interdisciplinary. I see and I embrace the connections that happen between different disciplines and different elements. But you've got to, at some stage, say to yourself, do you see yourself being interdisciplinary? Do you see your research field evolving, changing? Do you see an end to the current threads? And then what do you see as the next threads? Even though we're trying to get through and graduate on time and get that damn PhD dissertation done, we've still got to have this in mind as well. What are we going to get, beyond post the PhD? What are we going to get? We want to think about our research goals, optimism, challenge, realism. I think I can do it. I like a good challenge, but there's no money in it. So you have to think about, are your research goals practical for you, for the university or universities you wish to be involved with? What's the changing nature of your subject? If we look today, Australia, the United Kingdom is culling many social science courses. They're taking out entire departments that they say are uneconomic. That's true, the departments are uneconomic. But the moment we cut out certain disciplines, we're also changing the value of that discipline for those of us who are researching in it. We have to ask ourselves, will our discipline still apply in 10 years' time? Will there still be relevance? And if you can truly answer yourself and say, you know what? I can't. It's not going to exist, or it's dying out. Then you've got to make a plan now. What am I going to do differently? And if at the beginning of your PhD, you can see that you're one of the last researchers in your discipline, you've got to ask yourself, how do I springboard from this? Or how do I reignite interest from others so that this discipline continues? And finally, for the slide, some service considerations. And I kind of want to instill this in right now, especially for those of you who are early on in your PhD career. How do you give back? How do I contribute to the university? How can I be a reviewer? A lot of people say, oh, you can't review until you've got your PhD. That's not true. You can actually volunteer to review for journals during the process because it's fantastic experience. You can't be an editor usually until you've had, a PhD and a few publications, but you can certainly be a reviewer, and it's great, not only great experience for you, it's a great way to see what others are doing in your discipline. And you need to build this into your PhD experience. You have a PhD journey. How am I going to develop things? So one of the things I spent maybe too much time doing, but I was always more interested in the teaching. So I did a lot of teaching during my journey. But that's helped me further on because compared to some of my friends who didn't bother with the teaching and got their PhD and then went into it, that was quite a traumatic experience for them. So, we want to get all of these different experiences through. These are decisions. The teaching gives us confidence because right at the beginning, I asked, can you communicate your research to other people? Teaching helps us develop that skill to be able to be better storytellers, to communicate to others better. I want to sort of remind, I guess, of this, and we'll sort of, I'll rush through this one because I know that I think we're moving along in time. Oh, yeah, way moving along in time. Your PhD is an anchor, it's not a capstone. And what I mean by this is, look, the PhD doesn't define everything that you have to do. It gives you a starting point, but you've got to think about how will you use that starting point and how will you bring value to your research community from the skills that the PhD taught you. Because we're more interested in the skills and the competency than we are in the outcomes and the research. So it's about extrapolating skills. It's about being interdisciplinary. It's about the future of your discipline and also the future of the funding you might get from it. Will the same opportunities be available, down the track? It's also about immediate versus gradual change. How fast do you see things changing? And how are you going to fit into that? How am I going to expand the skill sets that I have? How am I going to take advantage of the opportunities when they come? And more importantly, how do I make sure as a researcher I make an informed choice? Because the early stages of our research, our choices are not that fully informed. The later stages, when we get the chance to reflect back, oh yeah, they're well, they're well informed in that respect. How do I stay on top of research trends? So even as a doctoral candidate, you know what you're doing, but you realize the trends are going in different ways. How do you keep abreast of that and have a relationship with those trends so that when your PhD is done and dusted, you can jump on to the next project that you're comfortable with in respect of those trends? You have to think about issues like teams versus independent research. So as I said, even as a PhD candidate, you may have people helping you. You have to think about issues of authorship. Where I come from, it is, I think the term is customary. I think I want to say typical, but it's customary that your supervisor is always a second, third, or whatever author on any paper that you write related to your postgraduate dissertation. Whether they contributed to the writing or not, they contributed to the formation of ideas. So in the universities that I studied at, the universities that I've worked at, in many cases, that's been the expectation. But other parts of the world, it's very different. So you have to also make a decision early on with your supervisor. If I publish, do you expect to be second author? What do you want out of that? There was a situation that happened to a friend of mine when he was doing his master's degree. And his supervisor was a well-known professor who published everything because of that convention. But this professor had a different rule. He said, I'm happy for you to publish. I'll even help you. I want first name. And he literally took first name on every publication of his research students. The university didn't stop him because it's not considered inappropriate at the time. And we're talking the 90s here, so it's a bit of a different environment. But having that understanding with your supervisor of how that's going to work is very important. Knowing what sort of collaborations you want to do and also understanding your level of comfort within that is very important. Now, I'm going to kind of wrap up the last few slides a little bit fast, but let me try to get through these. Managing your data is a major decision. This is about the processes and obligations that you have. How do you look after the data that you've got? How do you deal with the analysis of the data as well? Through what, platforms, software, etc. do you want to do? I want to give one piece of advice that has been consistent for me throughout the years. Software is expensive. Not every university has access to software, or not every university has access to the latest version of software. I only say this. I don't care what software you use. I care that you tell me what software you use, what version it is. If you're using Atlas TI and you're using a cracked version, and I'll be honest, I do. I have that because I can't afford Atlas software. I'm writing down that this is what I'm using, especially in a PhD. So very important that you're transparent about what you're using, but don't think that you have to go for commercial software over freely available or new or emerging software. Okay, you simply have to be able to define the software and the version so that I can replicate your research later on. Beyond that, don't worry. The processes and obligations is about who gets involved, what ethics conditions you put on there, how are you going to store it, so who has access to it? Is it on the cloud and only accessed by yourself and your supervisor? Is it only accessed by you? Does your research assistant, the person who helps you run the data, do they have access to it? When does that access stop? How long are you keeping the data for? So my research data, because of where I studied, my research data had to be kept on premises at the university for 7 years. And all that meant is printed copies of my data got shoved into a filing cabinet in my supervisor's office and not looked at again until 7 years later when they threw it out. But it was still there if it was needed. Now, I want to give, as I wrap up, I think this is almost my last slide, second to last slide, so I promise I'll be quick. Some random yet specific advice. And this comes back again, it comes back to the decisions we have to make. It comes back to how we grow as a researcher, how we develop our competency, and how we develop, more importantly, our confidence in doing research. So always look for questions, not subjects. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Mentoring is as important as the research. So even if you're not that happy with your supervisor, look for a really good mentor to help you out. Reach out with confidence. A lot of people say to me, hey, Craig, I tried contacting a couple of academics and I haven't heard back from them. It's a nasty, nasty scenario because some academics are assholes, I guess is the nice word, but they don't really like to engage with people that are outside of their circle. But confidence in how you communicate with them is much more important. And if you want to reach out to somebody, but you don't know them personally, but someone you know does, broker an introduction. Okay, get your friend, get your contact to introduce you. That also shows confidence in a different way, but at the end of the day, you get that communication. Set specific goals for yourself. Let your mentors know. Passion is the best motivator. Actually, money is, but passion is pretty damn good too. Attend talks like this, broaden your horizons. That's not only methods talks. Listen to other people who are talking about things that relate to your discipline. Learn the different styles. Now, this is not only about content. This is about watching and observing the way others tell stories about things that have a relationship to you. This is that communication. This is the defense, the storytelling, the explaining, the being able to work with different audiences. Very, very important. Where you can, align yourself with one or two experienced professors. And this doesn't mean they're your supervisor. They might just be a mentor. They may be somebody that you go to once in a while for a conversation, but find those more experienced academics that you can work with in some format. It's never too early to learn research skills. And I want to flip that. It's never too late to learn research skills as well, to improve those skills. Method and analysis are two different skills. Being able to do it is one thing. Actually working with that data and figuring out what to do from it, that's a whole different thing. Develop tolerance, develop a thick skin, learn to cope with obstacles. Nothing is personal. No feedback is personal. Okay, at the end of the day, feedback, no matter how brashly it is given, is there for you to help develop your skills. Choose your path and never be afraid to change your mind. I've changed my mind a few times. I don't regret it, but what I've gained from the whole journey that I've taken is a lot of interpersonal skills that have made me much better at what I do. Have self-confidence. And I know that sounds really stupid because you can't just turn on a switch or click your fingers and suddenly everything's brilliant. But you have to fake it until you make it. So ignore the imposter syndrome. Many of us, even myself, even today, I still have imposter syndrome. I go into a conference to give a keynote, and I'm like, why am I here doing this? There's hundreds, thousands of better people. But at the end of the day, I'm the one they chose. They believed in me. Other people believe in you. So the imposter syndrome is illogical. If we can think like that and we remember other people, and honestly, if somebody believes in you so much and you're struggling, it's also their responsibility to help you out. So use that time to say, hey, I really am lost here. What can I do? Build and focus on communication, stakeholder relationships, what I talked before. Volunteer where you can, university plus outside. Gain experiences. The outside is more about the stakeholder relationships. It's giving you opportunities to try something that is a little bit different than usual. I'm going to encourage you to experience multiple methods. Now, that might be today or into the future, okay? Because you can't necessarily change the methodology you want to use now just because Craig said experience multiple methods. But when you're doing, maybe for example, you're writing up your dissertation, as a side to that, you're also wanting to do a bit of publishing. That's where you have the opportunity to perhaps use a different methodology or post the dissertation to explore different methodology and see what works for you and see how they relate to each other. Identify the skills and resources that you have. And most importantly, the biggest decision of the lot, other than, yes, I'm going to do my doctorate, is having personal development planning. How are you going to develop your skills over the coming 18 months to 3 years to actually succeed with the PhD? Now, the final slide, I'm just, sorry, my own notes have covered this. One final piece of advice, a questioning guide. Think about what is your motivation and vision, you personally. What motivates you? What do you want to see happen? Why? What is your project design? Be able to communicate to me or to anybody else, frankly, but be able to communicate the design of your project in 3 minutes. Because the design is the most interesting part. It's going to tell me how deep are you going? Are you going to get the type of data that you want? I don't need to know about your project. I need to know how you're structuring it so you get the data. I want to know about your data collection. What's the plan for that? And is your data collection going to give you what you need to succeed? Analysis and interpretation. Then this comes down to, do I have the skills for this? And finally, communication and dissemination. Again, do I have the skills? But am I able to communicate my research to people of different standing roles within the community? Because it's not just about those who examine you. It's about everybody else, the impact, the purpose. How does anybody who benefits from your research also get the research communicated to them?